Are you determining your Zone 2 workout range the wrong way? Now, Zone 2 training is a great way to build fitness, but is heart rate really the best way to determine your Zone 2 training effort, or could the talk test be better? Well, I'm going to try and reduce the confusion a bit and make it easier for you to get the most out of your Zone 2 training by helping you determine the correct Zone 2 range for you. We'll discuss why Zone 2 isn't actually tied to a specific heart rate range, why depending on a heart rate zone calculator, it may be suboptimal, the best way to determine your Zone 2, and how the talk test can help you dial in your Zone 2 range. Hey everyone, it's Mark, and welcome back to the Fitness Roadmap, where we help you navigate the path to lifelong strength and health. Now, for full show notes and to get your free Zone 2 Quickstart guide, check the links in the description below, or you can go to thefitnessroadmap.com/006. Now, let's get into the Zone 2 zone. Now, back in 2022, I posted a video titled, Zone 2 Training Explained. Is this a key to living longer? Now, this has become the most popular video on the channel, and it's generated a lot of comments, which is fantastic. Now, I was recently reviewing those comments, and I noticed that there were quite a few that caught my eye because they indicated that there seemed to be a lot of confusion about what level of effort is actually required to be in Zone 2. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to share my thoughts on Zone 2 and how they've changed a little since 2022. Now, many people think, as I did at one point, that Zone 2 is determined exclusively by a specific heart rate range. In reality, a specific heart rate does not determine whether you're in Zone 2 or not. Now, from a physiological standpoint, the top end of Zone 2 is often referred to as LT1, which is short for lactate threshold 1, or you might hear the aerobic threshold. Now, this is the point where the body starts producing lactate at levels significantly above baseline and where the body switches from burning mostly fat for fuel and switches over to burning sugars. This is called glycolysis. Now, while we're burning fat for fuel, our mitochondria are working, and that's why Zone 2 seems to have such positive mitochondria building benefits. It's maximizing the use of our mitochondria, which basically makes them stronger. Now, the problem is that unless you go to a lab and have a proper aerobic capacity or sometimes called VO2 max test, you really don't know what your actual aerobic threshold is, at least not directly. And that's where heart rate zones have come into play as a way to try and estimate what our body is doing through the heart rate we observe. The good news is that we can get pretty close without having to do a test at a human performance lab. All it takes is a little experimentation. Now, many people seem to think that Zone 2 is always between 60 and 70% of your maximum heart rate. A lot of the comments on my previous Zone 2 video were stating just that. Now, I don't know the exact reason for this, but my thought is that oftentimes people see a chart with 5 heart rate training zones going from 50 to 60% as Zone 1, 60 to 70% as Zone 2, and so on till you get to a 90 to 100% as Zone 5. Now, I think that's an easy to remember categorization, and the Zone 2 on a 5-zone, Zone 2 on a 5-zone chart is often stated as the aerobic or fat burning zone. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes from. For many people, Zone 2 does fall within that 60 to 70%. For many others, however, it's not in that exact range. Now, what's interesting is that Inigo San Millan, who is one of the top researchers in the world on the benefits of Zone 2 training, stated in a conversation with Peter Attia that Zone 2, now this is from a mitochondria building view, is often between 70 to 80% of a person's max heart rate, not 60 to 70%. They also talk about how the talk test could be a good way to determine if you are actually in Zone 2. See the links in the description for clips to those videos or links to those clips. The key is if you can get to determine what your max heart rate is, that's going to help you get pretty close to your actual Zone 2 range. Now, the issue is is that most people, especially when starting out, don't know what their true maximum heart rate is, so they look to an online calculator to help them out. If you search for how to determine heart rate zones, you will get a huge amount of links with different methods to calculate your max heart rate and zone 2 range. Now this leads to a lot of different maximum heart rate and zone 2 range assumptions. Which method is correct? The reality is that without a proper VO2 max test, you're really just making an educated guess. But as I said earlier, we can get pretty close with a bit of work. So, with the common idea that zone 2 heart rate is 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate, just to keep things consistent, here's a few of the different heart rate zone calculation methods that people often use. So let's see what my maximum heart rate along with what my zone 2 range would be using each of them. The first is the 220 minus your age method. This is the most suggested way. Unfortunately, it's also pretty much completely inaccurate. There's really no science behind it at all. See the description for a link to an article called The Surprising History of the 220 minus age equation. Pretty interesting read. But if we assume I use that, my maximum heart rate is 160 based on this, and my zone 2 is 96 to 112 for 60 to 70% of my heart rate. The second method is called the Maffetone Method. And I have a link to his calculator in the description, but it's basically based on 180 minus your age. And then you add a little bit or subtract a little bit depending on your training or injury status. So my zone 2 calculated off of this calculator is between 110 to 125, once again depending on my training history and if I'm injured or not. The third method is called the Karvonen, or sometimes called the heart rate reserve method. Now this uses your heart rate, maximum heart rate, and your resting heart rate to come up with zones. So this is a little more precise because you actually are using an observed maximum heart rate as well as an observed resting heart rate to determine these zones. So it's likely to be a little bit more accurate as long as you have a good maximum heart rate number. Okay, so using this calculator, my maximum heart rate that I observed just a couple months ago during an interval workout is about 173, and my average resting heart rate is 45. So based on this, my zone 2 range is 122 to 135. Now, the last method and the most accurate is a lab test. Now, when you do that, you're going to get an actual number or range based on your specific results. It's the most accurate, but it's also the most expensive, $100 to $300 or more. As you can see, each method gives a different zone 2 range. I think that's where the confusion comes from. So, which calculation is best? Well, if you don't get a lab test done, then I think the Karvonen or heart rate reserve method is the one to use if you have a good maximum heart rate number. If you don't, then I would use the Maffetone method to get you in the ballpark. I would say ignore the 220 minus your age completely. But don't depend on a random heart rate calculator to set your zone 2 effort. Unless you have an actual lab test number, I think using the talk test might be the best way, as long as you use it correctly. Now, many people assume the talk test means that you can carry on a conversation without any interruption for breathing, just like you'd be if you and I were sitting across a desk from each other having a talk. The reality is that you should be actively working, and if you were to talk with someone on the phone, they would definitely know you were exercising. You would not be able to hide it. So I'm going to show a clip here of me at my zone 2 going through the talk test to give you an idea of what the talk test should sound like. Okay, I'm in the middle of a zone 2 workout right now on Zwift. My heart rate's between 120 and 123, and as you can tell, I'm working, but I'm not gasping for breath. So if you were to give me a call on the phone right now, we could have a conversation, but I would not be able to hide the fact that I was exercising. So this is a pretty good example of what zone 2 should feel like when you're using the talk test to determine your effort. Now, I think the bottom line is that basing Zone 2 training off of a specific heart rate or range by itself might be the wrong way to approach it, especially if you don't have a proper VO2 max test to go off of. So calculating a range off of maximum heart rate is a good place to start, but unless you know your maximum heart rate, it can be tough to know what you're in the right range or not. That's where the talk test can be very beneficial in verifying that you're putting out the right effort. Now, as for me, even though I know my maximum heart rate, I still use the talk test to confirm my effort every time I do a Zone 2 workout, instead of trying to fit it into the box of a specific heart rate zone. Now, my wife started doing dedicated Zone 2 training last year, and she's used the talk test from day one to gauge her effort while riding on the trainer. What about you? What do you use to determine if you're in Zone 2? Have you done a proper VO2 max test to confirm your exact Zone 2 range, or do you use some other method? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Now, in the description, you're going to see links to all the articles, the video that I posted, and the calculators I mentioned are all down there in the description. So be sure to check them out. You'll also see a link to the free Zone 2 Quickstart guide that I put together that you can download to help you start getting all the benefits that Zone 2 training can provide. Check it out. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and hit the like button. It really does help the channel. And be sure to share this with a friend. To see the original Zone 2 video from 2022, check this link over here. That's it for now. Until next time, take care, enjoy the journey, and be well.